The moment she slammed her palm against the police car hood, everyone went silent. "Get her out. She doesn't belong here," Karen screeched, her acrylic nails clacking against her phone screen as she dialed 911 for the third time in 5 minutes. My wife hadn't even finished unpacking. We'd only moved in 2 hours ago. But that's when it all started. Sirens wailed in the distance. 2 squad cars pulled into the driveway, lights bouncing off the pristine walls of our new suburban home. I turned to look at my wife, former combat search and rescue, 12 years in the Air Force, honorable discharge, Bronze Star. She didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She just stood, arms crossed, watching the officers approach. And Karen? The moment she caught a glimpse of that military ID in my wife's hand, her face went pale like someone had ripped the soul out of her through her mouth. But by then it was too late. She hadn't expected her to speak like that. Calm, commanding. "Official, ma'am," my wife said to the lead officer. "I believe you've been given false information. May I present my identification and the title deed?" The officer blinked, taking her ID. A long pause followed as he read it. Karen backed up, muttering something about HOA regulations and proper vetting, but no one was listening to her anymore. Not after what the officer said next. "You served in Afghanistan?" he asked. 3 tours, my wife answered, not smiling. The tension cracked like glass. What happened next shocked every neighbor watching from behind their windows. Because this wasn't just about Karen being nosy. It was deeper, colder, planned, and my wife knew it, because she'd seen this kind of behavior in hostile zones before. It always started with fake friendliness, then restrictions, then accusations. But this time, it was happening at home. When we bought the house, we thought we were starting fresh. New beginnings. Quiet life. It's the kind of place where people waved as they walked their dogs and kids rode bikes past trimmed lawns. End of our first day, my wife was giving a statement to police. And Karen was screaming about bylaws like she owned the county. See, Karen wasn't just any neighbor. She was the president of the HOA, the self-appointed gatekeeper of the entire neighborhood. And she didn't like surprises, especially not new residents who didn't introduce themselves through her. She never submitted a tenant application. Karen kept yelling, pointing at my wife. "She's not on the list." But this wasn't an apartment complex. This was a private home. Our home. Paid for, registered, legal. The officers knew it. My wife knew it, but Karen didn't care, because it wasn't about rules. It was about control. The first signs should have been obvious. The long stares from across the street, the whispered conversations on porches when we walked by, the notes on our mailbox. Grass must be no taller than 1.75 inches. The calls to our contractor. "The citation about our non-compliant welcome mat." I thought it was petty at first. Suburban nonsense. But my wife, she saw it differently. "This feels like an op," she said on our 3rd day. "Coordinated harassment. Someone's running a pattern here," I laughed. "Babe, it's just some cranky neighbors." But that night, someone keyed her car. Deep, jagged lines across the door. 2 words. "Not welcome." Yes. When I stopped laughing, we reported it. Karen said it must have been local teens. She even smiled while saying it. "This neighborhood's safe," she said, "but we don't always know who moves in around here." Her eyes never left my wife's face, not once like she was, waiting for a flinch. But again, my wife didn't give her one. Just a cold stare. The same one she probably gave insurgents in dusty alleys who held their rifles a little too long. That week, 5 packages went missing from our porch. The 6th one was found torn open on Karen's lawn. Coincidence? Maybe, but then came the fake complaints, loud music that never played, trash bins left out when they hadn't been, supposed smoke from our grill. Karen filed them all. Every day. And on day 12, she made the call that changed everything. She told police someone was squatting in the house. That there was a woman sneaking in through the garage who looked dangerous. She never said veteran, never said my wife. She said suspicious female. That's why the cops came with their hands near their belts. That's why 3 neighbors were already filming with their phones when we stepped outside. That's why Karen stood there, lips tight with anticipation. She thought she'd won. But instead, she saw my wife step forward, show her ID, and calmly defuse the situation like she'd done 100 times before in war zones, far worse than this HOA battlefield. The officer nodded, turned to Karen and said, "Ma'am, you've wasted our time." And for the first time since we met her, Karen had no words. But if you think it ended there, you're wrong. 'Cause within 48 hours, a letter appeared taped to our door, not from the HOA, but from someone anonymous. Typed. No signature. "Leave while you can," it said. "You're not safe here." My wife read it without blinking. She folded it, slid it into a file, and looked at me. "They're escalating," she said. That was a test. I felt my throat tighten. "Do we do?" I asked. She looked out the window. "Behold position. But now I take lead." And from that moment on, the game changed. We installed cameras. She documented every interaction. And she started asking questions, like why Karen had no record of board elections, or why the HOA funds hadn't been audited in 3 years. Every answer she got led to another lie, another cover-up. And the deeper she went, the more dangerous it became. On day 20, we found tire tracks through our backyard. Someone had driven a golf cart around our fence. The next night, we heard scratching on the windows, sound that stopped the moment the lights flicked on. My wife sat in the living room with her service weapon legally holstered at her side. "They're watching," she said, "but they don't know I see them. I didn't sleep. I barely ate." But she was calm, because this wasn't fear for her. It was focus. This was what she was trained for, holding her ground when the enemy used whispers instead of weapons. Karen had no idea who she was messing with. The story doesn't end with a confrontation. It doesn't explode in some dramatic arrest. What happens is slower, colder, more revealing. Karen's power begins to crack. One neighbor steps forward, then another. A group forms. My wife speaks at the HOA meeting, lays out evidence, emails, footage, no yelling, no threats, just facts. The room shifts. Karen tries to talk over her, but it's too late. The control she thought she had, gone. Because people aren't stupid, they just need to see clearly. And that night they did. When we left the clubhouse, people clapped. Not for us, for truth and Karen. She didn't scream. She just stood there, quiet, frozen. Like the first time she saw that military ID, because she knew, deep down, that she never stood a chance. When the doors of the clubhouse shut behind us, the silence outside hit harder than any applause. Porch lights flickered on like watchtowers. Windows cracked open just enough for curtains to sway. People were watching, listening, but no one said a word. My wife walked with slow precision, scanning the road like she was still in enemy territory. "Karen won't retaliate tonight," she said quietly. "She regroup. Watch for leaks." I nodded, heart still pounding. Wasn't built for this kind of warfare. I'd never known that a neighborhood could turn into a battlefield without a single bullet fired, but she had. She'd seen it before, not here, but overseas, in towns where smiles were weapons and silence meant sabotage. And now, somehow, that same war had followed her home. We reached our front door and she paused, eyes locked on the frame. "Finger smudge," she said. "Someone's touched it." I leaned in. She was right. Faint, but there. Top corner of the frame, like someone had tried to peek inside. She pulled out her phone, snapped a photo, then carefully opened the door. Lights on. Alarm panel green. "Clear," she said, scanning the room before I even stepped inside. It wasn't paranoia, it was protocol. This wasn't just our home anymore, it was a post, and we were under siege. We didn't talk much that night. She typed, cataloged, filed, every HOA letter, every neighbor's face, every whispered word that didn't match what was written in the bylaws. By midnight, she had built a digital war board, timelines, patterns, contacts, and at the center, Karen, the next morning, started like any other coffee. Headlights. The sound of sprinklers turning off down the street. But then came the knock. 3 slow taps. Not police, not a neighbor. UPS didn't knock like that either. I looked through the peephole. Nothing. She motioned me back, stepped in front, and opened it an inch. No one was there. It's just a small envelope on the porch. White. No markings. She picked it up with gloves. Inside, a photo. Grainy. Night vision. Us. Standing in our living room. Taken through our window, I felt my chest lock. They're escalating, she said again. Karen has someone helping her. That night, she moved the couch, repositioned the cameras, changed every lock, replaced the Wi-Fi. She didn't sleep, just watched, listened, waited, and then, at 2:17 a.m., the motion. Detector buzzed. Someone was at the back gate. She was already moving when I woke, silent, focused. She crouched low near the patio door, weapon holstered but ready. The camera feed showed a shadow, slowly circling the yard. Not a teen, not a prank.
At this person.
Knew where the cameras were? They never showed their face, left nothing behind, except one thing. A single screw, dropped near the fence latch. A warning. They're probing our response time, she said. This is surveillance. By dawn, she'd mapped out 3 entry points and installed secondary motion sensors. I asked how she knew all this. She just said this is the exact playbook they used in Helmand. Later that week, the community Facebook group erupted. Screenshots leaked anonymous posts accusing Karen of HOA fund mismanagement, of personal purchases charged to the Board of Selective Enforcement. Photos showed receipts, dates, emails. Every claim was cited. It wasn't a random dump. It was surgical, precise. And it wasn't just from my wife. Others had joined her now, quietly, carefully. A former accountant from 3 houses down, a retired school principal. Even the couple who once glared at us every morning now waved because they'd seen something shift. Karen wasn't invincible anymore, but power doesn't fade, it fights. That weekend HOA notices flooded the street. Random violations, threats of fines. Karen called an emergency board meeting, but this time, no one showed. Not even the other members. My wife had already sent them files, records of altered budgets, duplicate invoices, emails. Karen had accidentally CC'd to the wrong people. And the real kicker? A payment to a private security contractor, nearly $9,800, listed as consultation, but the address on the invoice, it matched the plate of the shadow seen on our security footage. Karen had hired someone. We took the file to the police. This time they didn't brush it off. They asked for statements. It's evidence they'd received other reports now, not just from us. Turns out, we weren't the only targets. Another family had left 2 months earlier after their dog went missing. A man 2 streets over had his car towed for a made-up violation. It all traced back to her. But legally, it was still tight. She hadn't committed obvious crimes, just created an atmosphere where fear replaced rules. That's when my wife made her move. She filed a formal petition to dissolve the current HOA board, signed by over 60% of homeowners. Legally binding. And at the next open meeting, she served Karen with the petition on record, in front of cameras. Karen's face didn't just freeze, it cracked. "You can't do this," she said, voice shaking. "You people don't know what you're doing." My wife looked her straight in the eyes. "You're right, we didn't, but now we do." Then she turned to the crowd and said, "We're not going anywhere. But this system it is." The room erupted, not in chaos, in resolve. Neighbors stood, spoke, backed her. And in that moment, Karen was alone. Not feared, not followed, just exposed. That night, she didn't sleep. Neither did I, not because we were scared, but because the silence felt different. Lighter, like something toxic had finally been drained. But the war wasn't over, because when someone like Karen loses power, they don't just vanish. They try to burn the whole system on the way out. And 2 days later, we'd learned just how far she'd go. A fake call to child services, a complaint about illegal weapons, even a forged noise violation signed with my wife's name. But it didn't work, because this time, people knew. Officers rolled. Officers cross-checked records. And slowly, her own lies began closing in like a trap she'd set for herself. Every lie she'd told, every document she'd doctored, now came with consequences. By the end of that month, Karen had resigned. Not publicly, not with an announcement, just a single email sent at 3:41 a.m. effective immediately. Step down. No apology. No explanation. And then silence. No one saw her outside again. Her car was gone by the next week. The house sold within a month, but the story didn't disappear. It became legend. The new neighbors ask us sometimes, is it true what happened with the HOA lady? And we just smile, because what really happened isn't about one woman's downfall. It's about how a neighborhood learned to stand up, how fear lost its grip, and how one quiet, disciplined, still-eyed veteran turned a war zone of whispers into a place worth living in. But the camera's still up. The motion sensor still clicks, because some battles don't end, they just go quiet. And if she ever tries to return, we'll be ready. The motion sensor clicked at 2:13 a.m. sharp, not wind, not raccoons. This was deliberate, clean, timed. My wife was already out of bed before the second chime. She moved silently, barefoot, floor creaking, under precise weight. I followed her into the hallway, adrenaline kicking in, breath shallow. She didn't speak, just pointed to the monitor. Camera 3, backyard slow movement, behind the cedar fence, just like before. No face, no entry, just a presence. Watching, testing. My wife leaned in, eyes narrowing, same height, same gait. This isn't a new player, she whispered. This is recon. My blood ran cold. Karen? I asked. She shook her head. She's gone. But something else is circling. Then she did something that scared me more than anything before. She smiled. That small, sharp smile she used to make right before walking into a briefing tent in the desert. We're not done, she said. They're sending a return signal. The next morning looked normal. Sunshine, lawnmowers, dogs barking. Down the street, but there was a tension in the air that hadn't been there since Karen left. A neighbor stopped by to drop off a pie. Casual conversation. His eyes kept scanning. You guys still getting those? ... Alerts, he asked. My wife just nodded. Keep your porch lights on at night, she told him. He understood. No more questions. As soon as he left, she pulled out her encrypted drive. She'd been tracking something for weeks. Odd movements on the community server. Unusual pings on her router. Background data transmissions from the HOA portal even after. Karen stepped down. Someone else was accessing board data, she said. And they're off the grid. No IP trail. Which means one thing. This was planned before Karen ever left. She clicked open a folder. Inside were 3 files, all labeled the same. Date: the day Karen resigned. Each one an anonymous report about us. Each one came from a different address. They planted people, she said flatly. And they're still here. That night, we got another envelope. No name, no address. Just 2 printed photos. One of my wife jogging through the park, the other of me inside our garage, reaching for a box, taken from a distance, both time-stamped, within the last 72 hours. She studied the angle. Someone has access to private property. These weren't taken from the street. The camera scan confirmed it. Both images had to be shot from neighboring houses, meaning someone close was feeding information. Karen didn't just abuse power, she said. This was an operation. Quiet, controlled, strategic. I sat down, hands shaking. Why us? She stared at the window for a long time before answering. Because I saw through her faster than they expected. And because I don't back down. She stood up, rolled her shoulders, and said something I hadn't heard her say since she left the military. It's time to go active. The next 72 hours moved like a tactical sweep. She contacted a friend, someone from her old unit, now in cyber forensics. No names, just the footage, the metadata, the files. Meanwhile, she went door to door, not asking questions, but watching reactions. One man closed the door mid-sentence. Another refused to make eye contact. But the worst was the woman 2 doors down, always friendly, always waving, now frozen, clutching her phone too tightly. She's part of it, my wife said. When she got home, not high up, but she's scared. Which means someone gave her orders. That night, We heard it scratching again, this time at the attic vent. Not random. A tool. My wife bolted up the ladder. I followed with a flashlight. Inside, taped under the vent grate, another photo. My wife, mid-sentence, speaking at the HOA meeting, the back of her head circled in red ink. And beneath it, one typed line, "We're not done." She took the photo, locked it away, and started making calls. No panic, no drama. It's protocol. "This is intimidation," she said. "And it's escalating faster than I thought." By the next day, 3 neighbors had come forward privately. Each one had their own story, tampered locks, odd messages, unmarked packages, and each one ended the same way: silence, fear, retreat. My wife gathered their statements, anonymized them, and built a timeline. It went back to years. Multiple families had moved in, then suddenly disappeared. No goodbyes, no sales listings, just gone. "This isn't just about us," she said. "This is a power system. And it's bigger than Karen." That's when she found the name, tucked deep in the HOA's archived files. Community Standards Compliance Partner RM Solutions LLC, buried in fine print. A subcontractor, privately owned, not local. She tracked the address. It wasn't real, just a mailbox in another state. But the phone number worked. She called, didn't identify herself, just asked questions. And the man who answered said one thing before hanging up. No comment. "Shouldn't have found this number." The line went dead. My wife sat for a long time after that. Then she looked at me and said, "This goes way past Karen. Someone was building a control structure through HOAs. They didn't expect anyone to fight back." I didn't know what to say. I wasn't built for this level of darkness. She was. And now that she'd seen it, she couldn't let it go. "We need to make this public," I said. She shook her head. "Not yet. If we go too early, they'll bury it. We wait. We gather. Then we burn it all down with proof." Started. Locking the garage from the inside. Never used the front door twice in a row. She switched phones. I stopped posting anything. We lived quietly, strategically. But the attacks didn't stop. Our electricity was cut twice. The HOA portal accidentally charged us 3 months of dues. A local real estate agent knocked on our door, offering to help us relocate quickly if we felt unsafe. "Ah," she laughed in his face. "Well, tell them we're not leaving," she said, eyes like steel. And then came the final push, an anonymous email sent to her former command. Accusations, fake reports, trying to tarnish her record. It failed. Her file was clean. It's clean for lies to stick. But that was their move. Destroy reputation. Force retreat. My wife didn't flinch. She doubled down, filed a federal complaint, sent evidence to 3 investigative reporters. 2 replied. One wanted proof. The other said, "You're not the only one." Within a week, the first article dropped. Title: "The Hidden Tyranny of HOA Subcontracting a Silent Crisis." Our neighborhood wasn't named, but the tactics were identical. Ghost companies, fear-driven enforcement, coordinated pressure on vulnerable homeowners, and the scariest part was happening in over a dozen cities. The story exploded. Local news picked it up, then national. HOA boards across the state scrambled. Audits launched. Lawsuits filed. And in the middle of it all, my wife, quietly feeding facts to the people who needed them most. No credit, no spotlight, just results. She didn't want fame. She wanted freedom. And she was winning. Weeks passed. The neighborhood changed. People talked again, smiled, offered help. The cameras stayed. The sensors stayed. Because Karen may have left. But someone sent her. And until we know who, we're still watching, still waiting, still ready. Because this isn't just our story anymore. It's everyone's. The package arrived at dawn. No sender, no markings. Just a plain brown envelope slid under our back gate. Not mailed, not delivered. Hand-placed. My wife was already awake, standing in the kitchen with a coffee in one hand and the security feed open on her tablet. 2 hours ago, she muttered, scrubbing backward through the footage. A dark figure had slipped through the alley behind the fence. Hooded, silent, fast. But this wasn't surveillance anymore. This was delivery. Inside the envelope, a flash, drive, and a note written in block letters with no signature. If you're serious, use this, but be careful. You're not just up against one HOA, you're up against a system that was designed to stay hidden. My wife didn't even blink. She just said, "We've got a whistleblower." The data on the drive was deep. Logs, email threads, company spreadsheets. Meeting notes from something called Regional Behavioral Oversight Alliance. Not an HOA, not a government office. A corporate shell built to sit between boards and private enforcement teams. "This is the middleman," she whispered. The same company behind RM Solutions. One line stood out. It was buried deep in a compliance memo. Standard protocol. Install at least one behavioral informant per 10 occupied units. Preferred profile. Retired, anxious, or recently divorced. Easier to control, easier to direct. My stomach twisted. They were building compliance networks inside neighborhoods using vulnerable people as pawns. And they paid them to report on their neighbors. Quietly, repeatedly, legally. She read for hours. I watched the door. The whistleblower had sent more. Then proof, they'd sent a map. A nationwide list of locations where these shell programs were operating. 42 communities across 7 states. My wife highlighted one entry. Clearwater Vista, Colorado. Her friend Lydia had just moved there 2 months ago, and last week. She messaged about odd letters showing up in her mailbox. "They're trying to expand," my wife said. "Faster than they can be stopped." But now we had something else. Leverage. We sent the files to the same investigative journalist from before. This time, they didn't ask for proof. They just said, "We'll get it out before they can bury it." 2 days later, the second expose dropped. Inside the network. The corporate war on American neighborhoods. Photos, documents, voice recordings all authenticated. The whistleblower's information was ironclad. The reaction was immediate. News vans swarmed affected communities. Senators made statements. State attorney generals launched investigations. For the first time, the system flinched. And in the middle of the firestorm, our house sat quiet, cameras rolling, lights off, doors locked. Because we knew what came next. Exposure didn't end these operations. It enraged them. At 3:06 a.m., the power went out. Not a storm. A fuse. The entire block went dark for 12 seconds, then flickered back on. All except our house. My wife didn't panic. She grabbed the backup battery for the cameras and slid her Glock across the counter toward me. "If they're coming, they'll come now. They'll directly." Single word appeared on our smart hub screen. Not typed, not spoken. Just flickered in electronically enough. That was the message, not a warning. Threat. We went dark, shut down Wi-Fi, switched to mobile hotspots.
Al moved our files to encrypted drives.
She even rotated our parking habits, left lights on in empty rooms, used dummy routines. This wasn't paranoia. This was counterintelligence. How she learned to do all this? She said, "You don't spend 8 years dismantling covert networks without learning how to become invisible." But the scary part? She wasn't shocked. She was calm, because this wasn't new. It was just closer than ever before. Then came the phone call. Blocked number. My wife answered with a recorder running. A male voice altered. "You're getting too close. Walk away. Or we won't come through the fence next time. We'll come through the wall." She didn't even flinch. "Bring tools," she replied. "We just reinforced the studs." Then she hung up. I didn't know whether to laugh or collapse. That night, she put the entire neighborhood on alert. Quietly, through burner group chats, encrypted messages, and one-on-one talks. No one panicked, not this time. Because they knew what we were up against now. They weren't just homeowners anymore. They were part of something bigger. A resistance. We weren't the only targets. Another whistleblower came forward, a woman named Camille in Arizona. Former enforcement contractor, she had been paid under RM Solutions for community behavioral engagement. She'd quit after realizing she wasn't observing crimes. She was instigating reactions. Her statements went public. Now there were lawsuits, congressional hearings. But retaliation hit harder. Her house was vandalized. Her brother followed to work. She contacted my wife directly. They spoke for an hour. I only caught pieces. But I heard the last line clear as day. Camille said they don't care about laws. They care about silence, my wife answered. Then they'll hate what's coming next. And what came next changed everything. She built a presentation. Not for media. For law enforcement. She compiled every name, every contract, every shell company. She connected them across a map. And then she linked them to federal grant money, funds designed for community safety initiatives. It was all legal. On paper, but it was fraud in spirit, and worse, it was coordinated. She submitted her findings to the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. 3 weeks later, we got a call from a verified agent. He didn't ask questions. He just said, "We've seen this before, but never with this much proof. Thank you." And the subpoena started, and the system began to buckle. But power doesn't go down without a fight. One night, a drone hovered over our backyard for 12 minutes. Silent, lights off. It wasn't a toy. My wife grabbed the jammer, knocked it out of the air, recovered. The SD card. Photos of every room in our house taken through the windows. She didn't panic. She uploaded the footage, time-stamped everything, then mailed it directly to the DOJ field office, handling our case. "We're past HOA drama now," she said. "This is surveillance against a federal witness." That same night, a plain black SUV parked across the street. Engine off, no lights. It stayed there until 3 a.m., then disappeared. But not before she got the plates. 3 days later, that SUV was found torched on a back road 20 miles out of town. We never heard who owned it, but we didn't need to. Because the message was clear. They were losing control, and people like that, they always panic when the illusion of power fades. But this time, it wasn't just my wife watching. The world was watching. The press wasn't the only one knocking. Now, federal agents showed up quietly, no sirens, no jackets, no neighbors alerted. A simple knock on the back door at 4:42 p.m., my wife opened it without hesitation. 2 agents. One male, mid-40s. One female, younger, eyes sharp. No wasted movement. "We're with the task force," the woman said. "You've made noise." The right kind? They didn't ask to come in. They didn't need to. My wife was already leading them to the files, the servers. The duplicate archive on the encrypted drive, everything. They said almost nothing while they reviewed it. But I caught their expressions, not surprised, confirmed. Like this was just one of many pins they were tracking across a national map. "This started as a neighborhood case," the male agent finally said. "But what you uncovered this is engineered coercion," the woman added, "and it goes way higher than HOAs." That night, we received a second letter, hand-delivered, taped to our garage door while we were inside. No sound. No security alerts. No footprints. Just paper. Thick, cream-colored, expensive. Inside, a cease and desist letter. Signed by a law firm representing the Property Standards Advisory Council, a company we'd never heard of. But my wife knew exactly what it was. "Another shell," she said. "They're sending a legal flare hoping we'll flinch before it spreads further." But she didn't flinch. She scanned it, logged it, then wrote back in her own handwriting. "We don't cease, and you no longer get to exist in the shadows." She mailed it to every board member whose name we'd uncovered so far. Within 72 hours, things escalated. Our neighbor across the street, retired Air Force, widowed, quiet, found his tires slashed, not random. Each one punctured in the same exact spot, angled downward to avoid detection from the curb. He didn't even report it to police. He came to our door instead. "It's happening again," he said, voice low. I knew Karen was just a pawn, but I didn't think they'd come back this fast. My wife nodded. They never left. They just went dormant. Now they're desperate. We helped him install a motion sensor, reinforced his fence. By morning, 2 more neighbors came forward. Suspicious knocks, unmarked vans. One found a listening device under his porch light. This wasn't isolated. This was coordinated retaliation. It was spreading. The journalist covering our story sent a message. Multiple cities reporting similar activity. You triggered something big, my wife responded with 2 words. Time to escalate. She didn't wait for approval. She took the full file whistleblower documents. Surveillance evidence, drone photos, shell company connections, and field reports from Camille and others, and sent it straight to the Senate Oversight Committee. With a red-stamped label across the top, organized residential coercion, multi-state pattern of civil abuse. Within 48 hours, they responded, not with a press release, the closed-door hearing invitation. My wife didn't want immunity. She didn't need it. Everything she did was legal, but she did ask for one thing: make it public once it's verified. No redactions, no excuses. And that's when Operation Backfire truly began. We noticed the shift first in our own neighborhood. Karen's old house, the one she abandoned, was suddenly sold. But no realtor. No listing. A black SUV rolled up, windows tinted, and a man in a gray suit walked in, never introduced himself. But within 24 hours, the HOA portal listed him as temporary oversight liaison. My wife called it instantly. Damage control. They've inserted someone to manage the fallout. He didn't host meetings. He didn't return calls. We spotted him walking the streets at night, always with a phone in hand, scanning houses. One night, he stopped outside ours, looked up at the camera, smiled, then walked away. That was a message, she said. Not a threat. A challenge. She accepted. Over the next 2 weeks, the fallout spread like wildfire. National outlets ran exposes. Lawmakers demanded audits. HOA boards across the country started receiving legal letters from homeowners who had once been too scared to speak. The shell companies started closing accounts. But that's when it got dangerous again. Not in our street, but in the digital space. My wife's secure email was hacked. Twice. Once, by brute force IP flooding. The second time through a cloned interface that almost tricked her into revealing credentials. But she spotted the flaw. They spoofed the timestamp, she said. Lazy mistake. She changed protocols. Went offline. Reverted to analog backups. We've stepped into a higher tier of threat now, she told me. They've moved from physical intimidation to cyber disruption. That means we're costing them money and attention. Then, in a twist even, we didn't expect the whistleblower made contact again, but not through text, through video. An untraceable stream routed through 5 locations. A man in partial shadow, voice distorted. "How you exposed their front," he said, but the board Karen worked under wasn't the top. There's a final layer. Private equity firms disguised as community development partners, they've been funding the enforcement arms. Because conflict in neighborhoods increases turnover. Turnover equals property value manipulation. You're not dealing with a rogue HOA anymore. You're dealing with a real estate cartel. My wife didn't blink. She just said, "Where do I start?" He gave her one name, one company, one address. That night we packed, not to run, to go straight into the lion's den. She boarded a plane the next morning, destination, Washington. I see. She wasn't going as a victim or a witness. She was going as a professional, military-trained counter-network strategist with documented proof of coercion, fraud, and organized deception at the national housing level. I stayed behind to keep eyes on our neighborhood, to protect what we had built, to record everything in case the system tried to erase her again while she testified behind closed doors. I tracked every alert, every car, every click. The man in the gray suit disappeared the same day she landed. His house went dark. Within 72 hours, 4 other liaisons across the country resigned quietly. One left a note behind. I was told it was just about property values. I didn't know we were destroying lives. My wife returned 3 days later. She didn't speak much at first. just went to the bedroom, changed, made coffee, then sat down across from me. Finally, she looked up and said, "It's going to be bigger than we thought." I asked how big. She said, "Enough to change how neighborhoods operate. Forever." Then she smiled. Because for the first time in months, maybe years, the system was afraid of her, not the other way around.